Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. You're watching Indigo Tech Tutorials. And I know it's been a super long time since I made a video, and I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry about not being consistent, but I don't know, I've just been struggling to make these videos and just to sit down, but I think I'm finally ready to get back to it. And over the past few months, I've really wanted to start doing this again and come back to making videos because it is so much fun and I really love it. But yeah, that's why I want to come back and I want to make this first video. And in this video, I want to explain how the keyword variables work in Ruby. And what I mean by that is, in the Ruby programming language, there are certain keywords that when executed in a Ruby program will act differently than any other piece of text or string in your code. So a keyword would be something like class. So if you're defining a class, you use the class keyword to define that class, and then you're able to create a class in a Ruby program. So that's one keyword. And then another keyword is def, which is for defining a method. So def, you are able to use that to define methods in Ruby and then run those methods in your code. So yeah, I think the keywords are really cool, and I just kind of want to talk about them and explain how the different ones work, and maybe we'll run across some keywords that are more rare and I haven't really seen much of. Okay, so what I'm going to do to go over the keywords in Ruby is I'm going to create a Ruby file. So first of all, let's go to the terminal, and I'm going to just make a new directory, and let's just call this like YouTube code. So this is where I can store some of the code that I will write for the YouTube videos. Okay, so we now have this YouTube code folder. I'm now going to create another directory for storing the code for this video, which is about keywords. So I'm going to make a directory called keyword, maybe, yeah, Ruby keywords. So now we have this new folder, and I'm going to cd into that folder. Boom, and now we're inside of Ruby keywords. So now I'm going to check if I have Ruby and like what my Ruby version is. So we can do that by typing ruby-v, and as you can see, I'm on the latest version, at least to my knowledge, which came out in July, and it's 3.4.5. Now, if you're following this on Mac and you have never installed Ruby, you're probably gonna have a if you run ruby-v in the terminal, you're gonna have a built-in Ruby version, which is included in your Mac, but you don't really want to use that because it's outdated, and you also don't want to try to upgrade that version of Ruby because it can break things on your Mac, because Apple uses Ruby in some of its programs, and it might need that certain version. So the way that you get around this is you're going to want to install Ruby using a Ruby version manager, that's the most popular and most reliable way to install Ruby, because then you could have multiple projects with different versions of Ruby and you could switch between them very easily, seamlessly. So you're going to want to download Ruby with a Ruby package manager. The one that I've been using lately is Mize. It's kind of newer, but it works very well, and it's also not only for Ruby. So once you kind of know the commands in Mize, you can use it for other programming languages, and so that is kind of helpful. In the past, we had like RVM, RBENV. You can still use those now, so if you have that, it's fine. But anyways, the whole point is we have Ruby, so I just want to cover that. And now for running Ruby code, there's a couple ways that we can do this. We can just type Ruby. Now, I'm pretty sure I guess this opens up an interactive shell, almost like if you typed in Python. If you're familiar with that, it opens up like the Python window. Although it's not really too intuitive that you are inside of this, but let's try. Say puts hey. Now the funny thing is, actually there's no way to like tell it to run. So yeah, I don't think this actually works. Exit. No. See, so that didn't work. So if you just type Ruby like that, it doesn't work. Okay. Now if you type Ruby, really what it's expecting is a file, a Ruby file. But I'm pretty sure that there's a way to just run random code, which I have done before. I think if you do -e, which means evaluate, and then we could pass in any sort of code. So let's say like puts hey, and that didn't really do anything. So let's try to wrap it in single quotes, and hey, look at that, it says hey. So that did work. Let's say hello world, and it actually prints that out. So that's how we can run arbitrary, or like we can run any code just as a string, which is cool, but that's not really how we want to organize it anyways. So another thing you have is IRB, which is actually like the Ruby console, and this is included with Ruby. So I think this works in where you can actually run code. You can run Ruby code here. You can even like you can add libraries and use them here. So technically we could just use this shell for the video, and as you can see, we could say puts hey, and it runs the Ruby code. And if we want to do like a calculation, define a variable, say num equals 1 + 2, as you can see, it also returns the result. So that's another thing. When you run the code, it automatically returns the result to the console, which is nice. Say puts num, boom, it prints out the number, and it returns nil because that's what happens when you do a puts, I guess. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a Ruby file, and then we can use that for running our Ruby code for this video. So first of all, actually I'm going to open up this whole folder inside of VS Code, which is the text editor that I use when I'm writing code. So now we are inside of VS Code, and as you can see on the left, we have an empty folder with nothing in it. So we can even just right click over here, click new file, and then create a new Ruby file. And let's just put a name of this as like, we can just say run. And then to make it a Ruby file, it needs to have the .rb extension. And as you can see, as soon as you add this extension, you're going to see that it's a Ruby icon. So that's good. So we now have a Ruby file, and with a Ruby file, we can run any sort of Ruby code. This is already a super awesome start. And just for our first Ruby code that we want to run, let's print out a message to the console that just says, hello world. Just a very simple standard message. And to run this code, we can go back to our terminal over here, and we could type ruby run.rb, and this will execute the code. As you can see, hello world, and we are able to run our code in the terminal. Now there's actually a way to run your code directly inside of VS Code, and to do this, we can get an extension for VS Code. So if you go over to extensions, you can look up Ruby Runner, and this is the one that I've run in the past, or I think I've used this in the past, or maybe that might have been for a different text editor. So I guess actually the one you want to use is Code Runner, which supports all of the programming languages. So that's pretty cool. So if you get this Code Runner extension, you're able to run your code, which I think you can like right click on the file. Oh, and yeah, there's this command right here, run code, boom, and it runs it in a terminal window down here. So whichever you prefer, if you prefer to have it, all in one, you might like this actually. Although I never use this bottom section. I always have like my terminal popped out. I don't know. This might actually be helpful, but I don't really want to use that just because I never do it. Right, so let's get into the video though. In this video, we're talking about keywords. So the keywords in the Ruby programming language. And what are keywords? So keywords are a certain set of words that are defined inside of a programming language that when you write them in your code, they perform certain tasks. And another thing is that you can't use these names for like your variables, or you can't try to use those as variable names because they are reserved. And I want to talk about what are these keywords, how do they work, and why do you want to use them. So I just want to go through the keywords that I know. So let's start off simple with class. So the class keyword. And another thing with keywords is you'll see in your code editor, if it has the highlighting for Ruby, which you want to make sure that you have that, it usually will. What you're going to see is that when you write a keyword, it's going to actually get highlighted and it's going to change a color. Another thing that it happens with these keywords is, as you can see when you press enter, it doesn't just go back to the end of the line, right? It does an indent. And that's because these keywords, usually they expect an end. So an end, actually end is a keyword in itself. This is a reserved keyword. And you use it for ending, well, you end your definition of a class, you end your definition of a method, and you also end your block, which we'll get to what a block is in a second. So end is just useful for ending sections of code, and it's reused. That keyword is used in, so many different places. So about this class, what is this keyword? How can we use it? And also, what happens if we just run class by itself? Let's see. I don't think I've ever done this, but let's say Ruby run. And if we run our code just like this with class, I'm also going to close that side panel. Actually, maybe I can close this window too. Maybe not. These icons are kind of big. Okay, anyways. When we run the code, it actually is just complaining about missing end. So, of course, when you write class, like I said, you need to have the end. So what happens if we just write this class end and with nothing else, and we run the code? So now when we run the code, it says unexpected constant path after class /module name must be constant. So here's the next problem, is that we don't have a constant name for our class, which is just anything. So we could just say hello world, as a class like this. And the way that it's a constant also, this is kind of interesting. So the difference between a constant and a variable is that a constant is going to be capitalized. I'm pretty sure that's all it is. So we can define our variable here, hello world equals hello world, right? And then we can define a constant, hello world, and see the only difference really is that it's capitalized. We can even use an underscore. And then if we put both of these, so one is a variable, one is a constant. If we run it, look, same exact thing. Well, I used the exclamation mark here, but it's actually the same exact thing. Now, if we want to inspect this more, and if we want to ask the variable or the constant about its class name. So remember, in Ruby, everything is a class because Ruby is an object-oriented programming language. And what that means is that you have objects compared to functional programming. I think you don't have any objects, which, well, I don't want to go into define, and I don't want to go into that down that rabbit hole, but Ruby is a object-oriented programming language, which means that everything is objects. And an object, to define an object in Ruby, you use the class keyword. Well, usually, I think an object, you can also have it as a hash, but not really. I think object really is just for classes. But what you can do is on everything in Ruby, every variable, anything, we can ask what type it is. So I think we can actually just say, we can call the class. We can say dot class, what class is this? And let's run our code again. And when we run, it's actually just string. So that's another thing, is that just because these are different, this is a constant, this is a variable, when we're calling dot class on it, we're actually just calling it on the part over here. So that's funny, right? We're calling dot class only on the definition. So even though this is a constant, it's really just the same as a variable because it's holding this information right here. It's just storing it, and we could call it later. Now, if we wanted to define another, so let's just do another object, another constant. Let's call this like test constant. And let's define this to the hello world constant. And now I want to run the same code, and it's still a string, okay. It's actually kind of interesting. You know what? Because I want to run some more like direct code, I'm going to go into IRB. And I want to put this here. And I'm just confused that it doesn't know that it's like a constant. So if we call .class, it's a string, of course, because when we run the code, we get back our string. Now, how do I look through these definitions? Oh yeah, here we go. That's cool. I never did this. I think this is part of IRB where you can like search through the methods and it actually shows on the right like how it works. Oh, that's cool. I'm just trying to figure out if we can actually see a difference between these two. I don't know if we can. Anyways, what I'm getting at is that this is a constant, and a lot of times what you'll see is you'll have a constant used for storing a fixed string. So like a piece of text that always stays the same. So for example, like an API key. You say API key equals 123. This is always going to be the same exact thing. Another thing you might see is freezing strings. So you say .freeze on the string, and this is actually for like performance reasons, where it becomes faster if you freeze your strings. And this you only do this on something that doesn't change. Like this string we know never changes, so that's why we can freeze it. But I want to say that in Ruby, and maybe like the newer version of Ruby, it automatically freezes the strings. So it does it for you. You no longer need to say .freeze, but previously you would always see like .freeze, and it was very recommended whenever you have a string like this. So here we go. This is a constant. It's just basically a capitalized variable. And another thing is that this is available, I want to say it's available globally. Let's try to see this. So if you have API key right here inside of run.rb, and let's try to make a second file. So let's just say like second code.rb, and inside of here, what I want to try to do in our new Ruby file is I want to require relative. So we can require a relative path to a Ruby file. So we can just say run.rb, and we might have to use like a / I think probably. So that just means look inside of this directory for the run.rb file. And when we require this, we should now be able to use the defined constant. You can say puts, here is API key. So this is a difference actually. So then if we go back to our terminal and we run Ruby the second code.rb, check it out, we have the API key. Now if I go back to run.rb and I change this from a constant to a variable, for example, API key, now it's just a variable, and we try to just run it here, I do not think this is going to work just because the way that Ruby code is scoped. So you're not able to import a variable from this script. And if we run the code, we actually get an error, undefined local variable or method API key. And actually it is because this is a local variable. I forgot about that. So in Ruby you have an instance variable and you have a local variable. So a local variable is scoped to the certain either method or file, like whatever the scope is. So if you define a variable in this file, you can access it anywhere in your code in this file. But if you define it inside of like a method, and then you say like my message equals hey, you are only able to access it inside of the scope of this method and not outside here. And because that's how Ruby works. So if you run this again, let's comment out our first puts. If we just run it with the message, as you can see, it says no undefined local variable message. Even though we defined it here, it's scoped inside of the method. But if we move this code inside that method, well, now we have a method, but we aren't running it. So we can just put this down here to run the method. And now, boom, we get our message and everything works very nicely. So that's how scoping works. And that's one useful thing for constants as well. When you require a file, you get the constant available as well. So that's very cool. Okay. So now, yeah, we covered variables and constants. And the reason that we did that is because of the class keyword. Remember, it needs a constant. You cannot use a variable name. And let's try that out. Hello world class. Now, actually, you know, this might actually work. Like, it got the highlighting. You don't usually see class names that aren't capitalized. Let's see what happens. Well, wrong code. Let's run Ruby, run.rb. And yeah, as you can see, we have errors. It says unexpected constant path, class/module name must be constant. And as you can see, this is not a constant. This is a variable name. Now, what if we can have a dynamic class? Said variable name equals hello world, and then we pass our variable to the class. Yeah, that's not gonna work. Yeah, see, it does not like this at all. There are ways to make dynamic classes. We'll get to that. But for right now, let's just get this class built. Alright, so let's just quickly define our class so I can show you guys how this works. So boom, we have a class with a constant as the name. And now when we run our code, it runs successfully with no errors. So that is good. Now, if we want to define a method on our class, we can do that. So if we do def, and this is another keyword, by the way, so we can talk about this. So the def keyword, def, is a keyword inside of Ruby for defining a method. So to define a method, you just say def, and then you put the name of the method. Now, this is the opposite of class, where class expects a constant. Def does not want a constant, I'm pretty sure. So if we say like say hi as a constant for our def method, I don't know if this will work. Let's see. We run our code. I mean, there's no error, but we're not actually executing the code yet. We just have a class. So to execute this code, we are going to have to call the class. Now, the way that we defined it right here, if you just say def method inside of a class, that is actually defining it as an instance method, which means you need to initialize the class, because that is how the objects work in Ruby. So what happens is you need to say .new on the class, and now you have initialized it. You have a new instance, which means like a new object. Like for example, it's object oriented. So you know, in the world, everything is an object. Everything is unique in the fact that it has, you know, this is an object. Like if you can see this water bottle, I don't know if you can see it on OBS. Whoops. Yeah, you can. So each water bottle in the world is an own object, but they are similar because they have the class. So actually, let's use this as an example. So we have class water bottle, right? Every water bottle is different, right? Like they're different. They're not all the same, as in they all exist in different locations in space. You know what I mean? But they have similar attributes, like the name. So if we want to define like def name, this is, or how about let's do the brands. Let's call it the brands. And this is a Nestle water bottle. So we have defined this method, and that is something that this class recognizes. But we need to initialize. We have to say .new to initialize our instance, and we could also define this, or we can not define it. We can set this to a variable water bottle equals the new instance, and then we can use that to call our instance methods, which are any method defined inside the class like this. So if you say like the brand, and well, we should actually do puts, and as you can see, it's Nestle. Now, this is this case that like every water bottle, well, not all of them are the same brand. So So if we wanted to pass in our option into the initialization of what the brand is, we could add a def initialize. So we have just created an initialize method, and this is what is ran when you call .new. So you might think, you know, we're calling the .new method, so we are expecting def new, but no. When you call .new, it actually just calls initialize, and it also passes in any arguments that you want to pass in. So let's just allow a brand to be passed in, like this, brand, and we're now expecting this to be set. And once we get this, we can define this as an instance variable, which we do by saying, we're using the @ sign, so @brand equals brand. And this comes into play of this is like why you would use an instance variable, because when you define an instance variable, it is available to the full scope of whatever you're in, and it's on the top level object, or not top level, but like the parent object, so, or like the current object. So because we're inside of the class water bottle, we're defining an instance variable which is now available in all of its other instance methods. So like def brand, we can now use whatever this instance variable is. So instead of saying puts Nestle as a string, we can say puts @brand, and this is going to print out the value that we have stored. And then when we initialize it right here, let's just pass in our brand, it's Nestle, and we can run the code. So boom, it works exactly the same, but now we can change the name. So if maybe it's not Nestle, it's like I don't know, 7-Eleven water or something like that, and we run it again, boom, now we get the new name printed to the console. So yeah, that's a little bit more about classes. Now I want to test if we can use a constant as the name of the method. So let's try to change our brand method to a capital B brand, and let's see if that breaks anything. Well, we'd also have to change where we call it down here, and as you can see, when we change that code, now it's like the highlighting got messed up. This doesn't look like a method anymore, so I don't think this is gonna work. But when we run the code, somehow it does work. So what that tells me is the expectation for a method name is different than a class. A class, it has to start with a capital letter, right? I think another thing is that you probably can't start a constant with a number. Can you? Let's try. Let's do a class 1 water bottle, and then we'll change that down there. I don't think this works. Nope. Because when you run the code, it's like, nope, it must be a constant. And when you add a number, somehow it's not a constant anymore. Let's try it again. How about we say to message equals hey. And then we puts this. See, it's not even highlighting because like it doesn't know what's going on. And then I want to comment out the rest of the code, and yeah, it does not like this. Unexpected constant, expecting end of input. And see, that's because we put this number with a constant. So you can't use a number in a constant. Now, can you use a number in a variable? To_var equals hey, puts to_var. Let's try. You also can't use a number for starting a variable name, but interestingly enough, you can put it afterwards. So if you do var _2, it works fine. And let's see if it's the same with a class or a constant. I mean, yep, same exact thing. So that's another thing to note. You can't use a number for the first character in a class or a method name, apparently. So now we got that covered. So boom. And again, on the def, on def, defining a method. See, if we define our method inside of a class, it is now scoped to the class, which means the only way to run it really is to initialize an object like so, and then call the method on that object instance. So yeah, hope that explained it pretty well. I don't know. I tried to use the water bottle example, but there are obviously other ways that you can do it. For example, like class pet. Let's say you have a pet, and we can define some attributes on it. Initialize, we can have a name. Say @name equals name. And So on a pet, maybe we have like the type of pet. So we could also define this. And now let's say that we have our pet. Let's start with a dog. So dog equals pet.new, and we pass in the name of our dog, which let's just say our dog's name is this is tricky. How about we just say our dog's name is Bubbles. That's a cute name, Bubbles. And then we can pass in our type, which is going to be dog. Let's do a lowercase dog. So we now have our dog object. And we could just put this out and let's see what we get. And we run this, see we have our instance, which is a pet. And then it has like this unique, identifier, which tells us that it's its own object. Now let's define a method on the pet, something that I can respond to, like say hello. We'll define this method. And inside of say hello, we can just put hello, my name is name, I am a type, right? And now let's run this code. Well, instead of putting dog, we have to put dog say hello, and we can get it to run our code. Now we actually got an error, undefined local variable name. See, we're trying to access name, but we're doing it without the @ sign, so it makes that not available. And the reason why I didn't use the @ sign is because I'm more comfortable doing it this way. And that's because inside of Ruby, there is a helper method called adder, writer. I guess this is kind of a keyword too. So we should go over this. So there's these keywords, adder reader. First of all, that's the one that we need right now. So if you say adder reader, which adder, this part means attribute. So attribute reader name. Now what this does is actually very, very simple. It allows us to call the name of the variable using, not using the @ sign, but it still grabs the instance variable value. So it looks like a local variable, but it's really just a method. So what adder reader does behind the scenes, all it does is it defines a method with the name. So this is actually just name, so def name, and then it returns the same name of the variable but with an @ sign. That's all it does. But the adder reader just gives you a little shorthand. So now we can say adder reader name. We can also do it for type, and we now can access these attributes inside of our methods. But more than that, we can actually access it on the class as well now. So we can just put dog.name here, and as you can see, we get it. So that could be good, or that could also be bad. Like, let's say maybe you don't want to expose these methods, you only want to expose say hello, so you don't want them to be able to just get like the name or the type. You only want someone to access the class methods that you allow. That's where something called private comes in. So we can create like a private section down here, and anything inside of the private section is only accessible from inside of the class and not from outside. So that means you can't like call it right here after you initialize the object. And I'm pretty sure you could put an adder reader inside of a private section. And by the way, private sections are only really used for a class, right? So you don't just do that in your Ruby code anywhere. You put that inside of your class, and it's because you want to hide certain attributes from, the class when we're accessing it. And now if we run the code, this is actually good, see, because when we're trying to put dog.type, it's saying private method type called for an instance of pet. So see, you're not allowed to access the type or the name from out here, but if we want to run the say hello method, check it out. Hello, my name is Bubbles and I am a dog. So it works perfectly well. And now what we can also do is like we can add another method like def is dog, and we can check if it's a dog. And what we want to do is we want to return true or false if it's a dog or not. And to do this, we can just simply check type equals dog, because we want to compare this. See, this is the comparison operator. 2 equal signs, compared to a single equal sign is how you define a variable, like up here. So you want to make sure you're using 2 equal signs. And this is going to compare the value that we have to this value right here, and it will return true or false. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say put stog is dog question mark, and we run this and it says true. Now I want to create another pet here, so let's say cat equals pets.new, and of course the name could be something else, I don't really know. Let's just call the name kitty, and we are going to put the type as cat, and then if we say puts cat is dog and we run this code, see, it returns false for this one. So a cat is not a dog, as you can see. So yeah, this is pretty cool, pretty cool. So yeah, I just wanted to use that as an example to kind of explain the classes a little bit more. Now there's another way that you can use the class keyword. You can use it inside of your class again. So you can actually define like nested classes inside of each other. So if we create another class inside of pet, which would be like, what would that be? Maybe if you wanted to like define more sub objects, like maybe even like the pet. I'm trying to think how you'd even, why you do this, I don't know. Let's just say pet has I'm trying to think. How about we say like a class toy? So we now have class toy, and let's see like what does this even look like. I don't even know what this looks like. So if we now call pet, and I think you use the 2 colons, right? This is colon toy. We now have a second class, right? And I want to just put this, puts pet toy, and as you can see, yeah, that is a thing, and we can initialize it like this. And really all it does is it just creates a nested class. Okay, so yeah, pretty simple. And the reason why you do this is, yeah, let's say you want more classes, but you want to scope them inside of here. You can do it this way. But another way you can do that is just by using a module. So we come over here and say module pet. But I'm pretty sure this will actually not work, because it might say that pet constant is a class and it's not a module. So because we're like redefining it right here, it's not gonna like that, as you see. And as you can see, yeah, we get the error. Pet is not a module. Previous definition of pet was here. So no, you can't do it this way. Now you can do it this way. So we can have just a class, and we could just simply define it the same exact way, pet : toy. And there shouldn't be any issues here. So that's how you do a nested class. And it's really just the same exact thing as this. It's just about naming, right? So boom, we can do classes here, but here's like the different part that I want to talk about. If you want to define class methods, so a class method is different from an instance method. All of these right here are instance methods, well, except for initialize. Initialize is triggered by a class method, I think, or maybe this is an instance method, yeah, because it's just like this. But a class method is something that's ran on the class itself and not on an instance, which means we don't have access to anything that we like passed in to initialize on a class. That's not something that we have. And to define a class method, there are 2 different ways that you can do that. 2 different ways, and that's what I want to show you. So the first way is with def. So you can say def, and then you'll say self dot, and that's how you say that this is going to be on the class. So we're saying self dot, method. And the method name, let's think like what is something that we want to put on the pets? How about maybe like a helper method, or like something like pets say, okay, Let's just say hello. Yeah, let's just do the same, say hello, but we'll define it on the class. And this is allowed. See, you can have the same exact thing, the same method, but we can define it on the class, and that's not going to cause an error. Although it doesn't really look right. See, the highlighting didn't show up, but I'm pretty sure this is right. I'm pretty sure. So then inside of here, we can put, you know, hello world. The only difference is that we don't have access to our name or our type or anything like that. So we can just simply run it on the class. And to do that, we can go in here and say pet.hello world. And we run that. Oh, it actually says undefined method hello world for class pet. So apparently it didn't like this self. So I think I did this wrong. Say hello, self dots. Is that not how you do it? I'm pretty sure that's how you do it. Maybe because I already have the variable here, it doesn't like that. Oh yeah, wait. No, that's why. Look, there actually wasn't. My code was right, self dot, but I'm trying to call hello world, and the name of our method is say hello, so that's why. Let's run it, and boom, yeah, see, it works. So this is the way that you can define a class method. And like I said, the reason like you would want to do this is maybe you want a method on the pet directly instead of like initializing it. You want to be able to access it directly like this. And you can also use this method inside of your instance methods, for example. And I think you can just do this by saying maybe with like just self hello worlds. So now when we say hello, we'll just call hello world, but we'll also say our custom message. Let's try to do that. So let's initialize a pet. This is gonna be, you know, a bubbly dog, and then we'll just say, we'll run the say hello method. And when we run this, oh, it actually says undefined method hello world for an instance of pet. So yeah, when I try to do the self, yeah, it did not like that. Oh, actually, because again, I'm saying the wrong, it's not hello world, say hello. Sorry about that, guys. And when we run this, oh look, it did like a whole loop, like a crazy loop. So it did not like that. And I think because at this point, when you call self inside of an instance method, it's actually talking about the instance itself. So this is not going to work. The only way to do this is you can say self.class.sayhello. And look, boom. And I wonder, I think, yeah, you need the self, because if you try to just say class, it's going to have a whole nother, an error. Like we said, name must be constant. So you have to do self. You can say self.class.sayhello. And then we could even comment out our custom message. And it's just doing exactly what we defined on the class method. So that's pretty cool. So that's the first way, is defining it with self. The second way is by using the class keyword again. So this is a different way that you can do class. You can say class, and then you could do these two arrows, you know, shovel, and we could pass in self. Boom. And this also expects an end. Now, when you do this, class shovel self, it's creating another scoped block right here, which we haven't talked about blocks, so maybe I shouldn't use that word. But basically, it just means that we have this section right here, you know. Inside of here, we can define class methods. So if I move my say hello here, boom, we now have the same exact class method defined, and we can access it the same exact way, you know, self.class.sayhello, or we could just go down here and directly call pet.sayhello, because it is a class method, and as you can see, it works. So hey, that's pretty cool. Okay, the next keyword that I want to talk about is the if keyword. Now this one is pretty simple, but it's used for writing conditions in your code. So you could say like if something, then do the code. And what you usually would say is, or what you'd usually pass here is a variable, and maybe you check if it's true or false. So if it's true, then it would run your code. If it's false, then it will not. And so that's one popular way. Another popular way to use the if variable is by doing a comparison. So checking if something is equal to a certain value, and if it is, then running the code. And I'll show you guys the ways that we can do this. So I'll start by creating a variable, and I'll just call this like should run code, and I'll set this to false. Now what we could do is we could check if should run code, then we can put out a message that'll say running code now. And of course this is set to false, so this would not actually run. And we could verify this by running our code in the terminal, and you'll see that this does not get printed. But if we were to update our variable to true and then rerun, whoops, as you can see, it ran the code and it printed the message. So that is a popular way we can use the if keyword to run our code conditionally. And with this you also get an else, so you can have an else condition. So if this was not true, or if this was not matching, you can have an else, and we can just put something else, like let's just do a dot dot dot, and we run our code. Of course it's printing the message because it's set to true, but if we update this to false, we can run it again and we get the dot dot dot, so it's not running the code. So boom, that's if and else. It's pretty easy. Now I'll show you guys the comparison. So let's say name, let's create like an array of names of we could do colors. How about that? We could do red, blue, green. And now what I want to do is I want to check if a color is equal to something, but first I need to loop through here. So we can say colors.each do color. Now funnily, this actually brings us to another keyword, which is the do keyword. Now the do keyword is a keyword that you use whenever you're gonna create or write a block. And a block is a piece of code that is passed to a method that is then executed. It's kind of like tricky to explain this, but the each keyword, for example, or the each method on an array is going to run a certain code on each element in the array. So I guess it is pretty simple to explain. And the block is where you write your code, and what happens is you get this variable passed into your block that you're able to use. So this is a local variable, and it equates to the current value that you are at when you're looping through each of the items in the array. So hopefully that makes sense. But if we were just to like say puts color, so you see we have colors that each do color, and then we're putting the color. This is going to loop through this array and then print out each value. It's pretty simple, and as you can see, it does exactly that when we run the code. Now what if we just only wanted to print out the blue color? So then we could say if color equal blue, then we put color, and you always use the end if you're gonna have like multiple lines, but it's possible to do a one-liner. So that's very common because, well, it's less code. So we can just put this on one line and say puts color if. So yeah, this is how you'd write your code as a one-liner with the if statement. You just add if to the end of your code without adding a new line. So it has to be on the same line. And yeah, that's how you can conditionally run some code. Now with the if keyword, you also have an inverse, which that means like you can check if it's not something by, well, there's a couple ways to do this. So let's say if we just wanted to change our statement here to say print every color that's not blue, all we have to do is change this comparison operator to change the first equal sign to an exclamation mark, and now we are checking if it's not equal to blue, so it'll print out all of the other colors. And if we run our code again, we see red, green, and no blue because we are explicitly not printing that. So that's one way that you can say if not. Another way is if we go back to the first example, the should run code equals true, right? Now if we wanted to check if not, we could say if not, well, if exclamation mark, then our variable, and that's the same as checking if it's not equal, which it's going to check if it's true or not, and we're going to check if it's not true, so if it's false, basically. But another way to do this would just say if should run code equal false, and that's a more explicit way to write this. And I'll just show you code now. So if it should run code, then it will run. But if we say if not should run code, as you can see, it's not working until we update our variable to false, because now it's just checking if it's not. But you can do this anywhere. You can actually do this outside of the if statement by putting an exclamation mark before a variable, I'm pretty sure. Let's check. So what happens if we try to print out this? Does this break? Yeah, no, it doesn't break. So it actually works anywhere. So we're just saying exclamation mark, which actually does the opposite. Basically, if this is true, it turns it to false. Now, when it comes to a string, I don't even know what it would do. So I'm going to try it with a string. And now it just says false. So interesting. Not. Because I guess the exclamation mark is just going to, I don't even know. It checks if it's true or false, but I don't know how it interacts with a string. It's kind of interesting. Okay, so that's the if keyword. Oh, and one more is the unless. So that's the inverse. If you want to just do the same thing as saying if not, you can say unless. And another cool thing with Ruby is you can actually say if not. I'm pretty sure, like the word not. So if not, should run code. This might be totally wrong because it's not highlighting. Let's write code. Let's say this is equal to false. This actually might be a JavaScript thing. If false. Actually, no, it works. That's not JavaScript. This is Ruby. So yeah, if you want to write your code like this, you can. Although, like, yeah, but that's the point of Ruby. You know, the point of Ruby is to make it more like English. And this looks like I'm just reading, you know, a book. Like English it doesn't really look as much code because it's just like words. So if not, I think you can even say then if you want to be like very, or no, not then. I spelled it wrong. That's why. So you can actually, like, if you want to write out your code in the longest way possible, you can do it this way. So if not, then run the code. And this also works. That's interestingly. And then we could say unless. Well, let's change our code to unless. So unless should run code. Do it, and boom, it still works. And I think we can also say that then if we want to. And it's just kind of optional. That's the cool thing about Ruby. There's like all these little small details that you pick up where you can write your code in like a very more, you know, English kind of way, but you don't have to. You can keep it very, you can change this out to a one-liner. Check it out. We just reduced our code by 2 lines by just doing it all in one line, and it still works. And it could either be unless, or it could be if not, or it could actually be if not, like this. So, oh, that's so cool. That's why I love Ruby. Ruby is a beautiful programming language. Okay, so there we go. We have if, else, and unless covered. All right, I want to quickly talk about the do keyword. So the do keyword, which I notice when I say that fast, it sounds like I'm saying dookie word. It's funny, but this is what it is, the do keyword. And so what you do with the do keyword is you use this for anytime you're working with a method or something and you need to pass a block. And I'll show you what you saw earlier, that I use this when interacting with arrays. So that's a common use case where, let's say you're looping through an array and running some code where you might do the do keyword. Another time is just different methods in code, like different libraries. They allow you to run a method and pass a block, which allows you to interact with the method even more. And even like during the process of maybe some code running, you can interact with it a little bit by using that block. So that is what the do keyword is for. And another word that you hear me saying is block. So a block is any piece of code where you're doing the do keyword like this. This is object, end. So this is what a block is called. You can also define this by using curly brackets. So this right here does the same exact thing, these two things. Now, if I run this just by itself, I'm sure it's not going to work. So let's just give it a try, because it's always worth a try. And look, we get a bunch of different errors. Like, okay, yeah, it doesn't like that. So now I'll show you guys how to actually use the do keyword and blocks. So let's start by creating an array. So let's do an array. And again, we could go with colors: green, blue, yellow, red. Okay. And now we can go on the array and we can do a method which will expect a block. So there's certain methods, especially when you're like running, when you're interacting with arrays or hashes or objects, you would want to run some of these methods. So the common methods that I use are going to be like map, each, filter, find, reject, like a couple of these, and these just do certain things on the array, and you can kind of infer what the thing means based on the name. So the first most basic one is just .each. So .each, we're saying we want to loop through each item in the array and run some code. And so we do need a block for this. You can't run this without a block. If you run this without a block, let's just see what happens. Well, actually nothing happens at all. So it doesn't even cause an error, it just, gracefully fails. Now, if we pass a block, and let's do this the shorthand way first, so the one-liner, which is just using curly brackets, and we could say, color, or we could do C for short, and then we could just say puts C. Now let's run the code, and boom, we just loop through the array and put the C, and then we could do a condition here, like if C equals green, so we only want to print out if it's green. So as you can see, that's pretty cool. And then of course we can go to the long hand method, which instead of using curly brackets, just switch that out for a do, and switch out the last curly bracket with the end keyword. And another interesting thing is you can actually do this on one line. Now if you run this, as you can see, yep, same exact code, but you do it on one line. And then if you wanted to make this a little cleaner, you can use semicolons. So I'm pretty sure you can just drop in semicolons, like, in a few places. And, well, maybe not on the do. But as you can see, we could put a semicolon at the end of our code and also after our end. And as you can see, that did not cause an error, like a syntax error. Now, if we were just to like sprinkle random semicolons, is that going to cause an error? No. So apparently, I think Ruby interprets semicolons as like an invisible character. That's how I would say. So you could kind of like just put these in and it just doesn't, it ignores them. As you can see, it does work. Now, I wouldn't recommend you doing this, at your job. You just put a bunch of semicolons. Even though it works, people might not like that. But that is kind of funny. And I think the reason is, like, you see a piece of code like this, it's pretty hard to look at. So for like these advanced one-liners, that's why you might want to do a semicolon. And I think it also allows, when you do a semicolon, it's like doing a new line where it terminates the arguments being passed in. So if you get familiar with writing code, it's like when you run a method, each space between anything after the method is going to be considered an argument. But I'm wondering, I think if you put a semicolon, it terminates that, that looking for the next one. So it's almost the same as adding a new line. And we could test if that works by writing some code. Say puts array.count, and then if we tried to just say puts array.first, as you can see, we have two different pieces of code running next to each other. But the problem is it's going to try to think that this is an argument for this method. So if we run this code, it's probably, well, interestingly, that actually did work. So maybe it does not think that. Let me try to find a better example. So how about we just create a method? So def hello, and we'll expect a name. And then we'll just say puts hello name. Okay. And I guess puts can be considered a keyword too. I was meaning to mention that too. I think puts is a keyword. It's definitely a keyword because it just prints out anywhere you are in Ruby code, just works. So now if we say hello person, and then we try to say like hello someone else, I wonder does this just work? Nope. Look, so error right here. I knew that I would come across this. So now it's saying unexpected local variable or method. So it was not expecting you to have any sort of method here, but because we have this, it's not working. Now, one way that we can try to get around this is we can add parentheses. Because the problem here is that we have the method right here that we're calling, we have the argument here, but then it thinks the next one, it's not thinking of it as running a method, it's thinking of it as an argument for the method. Now, let's try to add parentheses around this and see if that just fixes it. It actually still does not fix it. So having these two function calls right next to each other actually causes an error as well. It's saying unexpected local variable or method. So isn't that interesting? This doesn't work. Now we could add a double and sign, and I know that this would silence the error because I used this before. And it just means like execute this code and do this code. And if we run that, boom, it actually works. So hello person. Although it looks like it's only printing out the first one. You know why? Because the way that the double and sign, if this returns false or nil, it's not going to run the next code. So that's a thing about this. So and also the way that puts works, as we saw before, it returns nil. So that's kind of funny. So yeah, double and sign doesn't really work for this example. Now let's go back to the semicolon and just stick a semicolon right between, and boom, all of our problems are solved. So yeah, semicolon is pretty cool. I wouldn't really call it a keyword. It's more like a key character. Just like the block, the squiggly brackets are considered key characters here, I guess, because it operates in this way. But the crazy thing is that you can have an object too. So you can have an object like this, but then you can have a block where you loop over the object, even though it's both using squiggly brackets. And it's just the way that Ruby understands the language, which is so cool. So now look, we could filter, yeah, it's like person, pet, dog, job. Let's say I'm a YouTuber. Well, I'm trying to be a YouTuber, so if I keep working. And now let's do a filter on the object, and let's just, when you're looping through an object, you actually get the key and the value. We can just say if the key is equal to pet puts the value. Now this didn't actually work because I think the key is going to be a symbol, not a string. So, well, we can actually just convert the key to string. Say to string. And now, as you can see, that worked. And the reason why I did this is just to show you we have the squiggly brackets being used for one use case here and for another here. And Ruby just magically knows the difference. So yeah, this is very cool. So boom, we covered the block. We covered, a few other things. So I hope you guys found that interesting. Now, real quickly, before I end this video, because I know this is a bit longer video, I want to cover the yield keyword. The yield keyword is very cool. I really like it, and one of the first places you might see this, maybe if you're new to Rails and Ruby, is inside of your Ruby on Rails app, inside of the application layout. You have a yield keyword inside the body, and that yield keyword is used for rendering the template. So each of your pages in your app are rendered through yield. And when you go further than that, yield is used all over the place in Ruby code and libraries, definitely all over the Rails source code it is used. And yield is very cool because it allows you to, basically yield is running the code that's passed by the block. Now, you might not understand what I mean by that, so I'm going to show you. how it does that. So let's say that we have a method. This is where you run yield most usually. So let's say like hello, and let's not even expect an argument because we're gonna just use the block, and then we could just yield, and this will be the value of whatever was passed. We could use the value returned by this, or we could just use this to like execute some random code. So we could just even call this like run code, and then just call yield inside of it. And then, well, actually, yeah, let's do run code. Let's make a method called run code, and then we're gonna yield. And then let's actually make it run it as like a system command. So we can say system and pass in yield. And if you guys don't know, system in Ruby, this allows you to run like random commands, just like the same as in terminal, like saying ls or, you know, make directory, or just anything that you can do from terminal, you can run by using the system command. So now I want to use a block on this. We say run code do. We don't really have anything getting passed back through yield, but that's another thing where we can yield a value, which is inside of our method that we can then access in our block. So it's pretty confusing, but we don't need to use the straight line, you know, if we're not expecting. We can do it. You can use do without an argument. So that's something else that I should say. You can use do without an argument. And then let's just say that we pass in a string of like some command to run, like ls. And then let's run the code. And look what we got back. And the same result as running ls in the terminal. And look, we're passing the value here, and then we're executing it, passing it into the system call. And then if we wanted to, let's say, return some value, like how about a random number? We'll use the secure random .uuid, and I think we have to require secure random. And then let's pass it into yield. Which I don't know if you can use the parentheses on yields, but I don't see why not. And then do a random num. So now we have access to that number that was generated inside the method, and we can just put that out real quick. Random num is this. And check it out, we got a random number every time it's different. So really, this is very useful for designing like libraries and systems and code. If you want clean code and you want to do stuff like this, like being able to, you know, pass a block, and then it's a lot to learn, but like basically, yeah, you could pass a block into a method. And then another thing is that there's different ways that you can run yield. So you can run yield like this, but you can also actually accept a block keyword. So it's like and block or something like that. This doesn't really look right. And then you take the block and you like say call on it. I want to say that's the same as doing yield, and we can pass in a random num, and then we can forget about that, you know, running the code actually. And let's run, and it did not like that, run code and block. So this was not actually the way to do it. Oh yeah, oh no, yeah, there's no colon, just and block, just like this. That's what it is. And boom, as you can see, the code still works. So you can say block.call and pass it in this way, or you can just do yield and you don't have to have any additional arguments. So see, that's the same as just changing it to yield. Boom, same exact code. Yeah, okay, I think that's good. I think I covered most of the keywords. I'm sure there's like a few other keywords, so if you guys know any other keywords that I missed, please drop a comment down below, and maybe I will make another video where I come back and cover those. But anyways, if you guys enjoy this type of content, you like learning about coding, please subscribe, like the video, and I want to see you guys again soon as I make more videos. Alright, I'll catch you guys around.